Welcome to OAC Vancouver's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We believe that Jesus is needed and relevant for people in Vancouver today. The message of God's love and promise of wholeness was destined to be experienced within a faith community that worships, studies scripture, and prays together. We warmly welcome you to journey with us towards greater connection, purpose, and peace. We'll be sharing our recorded services and conversations with health and wellness experts. Enjoy.
Well, we are in a teaching series in the month of May called Love Does. And for those of you who missed the invitation, it is a reflection of a short book by the same title, authored by Bob Goff. You can get a 7-day devotional along the same themes in your Bible app. Or you can contact me if you want the audiobook to listen to it as a family, if you want a devotional book for your children. But this is kind of the emphasis after Easter, is recognizing that Jesus is love and his love for us. What do we then do? What does love in action look like? What does love practiced look like? And last week we welcomed Pastor Colin McLaughlin, who talked about how perfect love is so powerful that it can take away our fear of failure. Because love is gracious, because love advocates, because we recognize Jesus has that role on our behalf as our advocate, because God's love does that on our behalf in the middle of our failings and mess-ups, that we then become more enabled to extend that same kind of grace to others when they screw up and when they mess up. So it's that exchange that happens when we're in a loving relationship with the being of perfect love, that we get better and we get more bold and we get more gracious when we extend love to others. Today's message is about audacious love and the presence of audacious love. And I think it's so fitting that it's fallen on Mother's Day weekend, because it's hard to find a more deep presence, a more deep bond than the bond between a mother and child. And as we are acknowledging and thanking moms this weekend, of course, I want to recognize my own mom, who is currently in Australia. I haven't seen her in person for 4 years, but she's visiting this July and we'll have lots of catching up to do. She often watches our service after the broadcast, but it's thanks to my mom, I know, that I have a creative bent and that I have a love of the natural world. There was also spiritual mothers for me growing up. Elfrida Volk was my Pathfinder leader, and she spoke into a developing, awkward teenager. She spoke into the gifts and encouraged me, and just reminds me how important it is in a faith community that we have women who do that. I'm so grateful in this church, in OAC, we have many maternal matriarchs of this church, and I just want to acknowledge a few of them. I know I'm going to miss some, but I think of Zenaida, who is one of the ladies who had the first firm and honest conversation with me in my first month of being a pastor here. I think of Eileen, our librarian, who gives me articles or books that says, I think this is going to inspire you. I think of Hannah, whose wisdom in leading this church as an elder and as a board chair has always reminded me to not take the world on my shoulders and to pace myself. I think of Grace, who is a fantastic defender of what is right and for the change that needs to happen. I think of Gayleen, who's got such a deep heart and devotion to this church that spans decades. I think of Gloria, who's got the most compassionate heart. She takes care of so many people behind the scenes. Of Debbie, who not only raised her own children in this church, but as a Pathfinder leader and a Deer Lake teacher, continues to raise up the next generation. I think of Laurel, who just in short conversations says things to me like, I support you, I see what you're doing here, and I'm on board. I think of Marla, whose warm embrace has been a safe reception for so many. Again, countless women, I cannot name them all, but these are just a few of the matriarchs who have nurtured and mothered the people in this church. I think God actually has a very high view of motherhood, and sometimes it feels like we overlook that aspect of God, even as He self-identifies with mothers. So we're going to take a look at that today, but partly I think some of the crisis that we face in our society, in our world, particularly around the sanctity of life, and a concern about the rising rates of abortion have to do with this lost respect for the burden and responsibility that comes with motherhood, the responsibility that a pregnant woman needs. She needs so much courage. She needs so much confidence that there will be a community of support around her. How much more could we influence this debate if we collectively would step up and assure mothers, potential mothers, that in their needs and risk assessments, that there would be a system, a community that they could count on to support them through that. Mothers weren't meant to do this alone. It is a collective responsibility, and it is a powerful duty. The World Health Organization just in 2020, so 3 years ago, released data about pregnancy and childbirth, and it was alarming. They announced that 287,000 women died in the previous year during pregnancy and childbirth. That's a staggering number. That equates to 800 women every single day losing their lives while pregnant or giving birth, and 95% of it they deemed was preventable with adequate medical care. Obviously, this is taking place in the more impoverished nations, but still in the more developed or well-off countries, it's still 10 to 20% of pregnancies that will end in miscarriage, most commonly that first trimester. Then if you make it to the second trimester, there is another threat that about 10% of those births will go into preterm labor. And still, pregnancies that reach full term, the third trimester, there is still a 0.5 to 1% that a child at full term will be stillborn. This truly points us to the miracle of life, the things that we take for granted, that we are born when we take our first gasp. It truly is miraculous. But that miracle begins even before our first breath. I think that miracle, as you study biology and you look at what's happening in a mother's womb, you discover that there is an entirely new organ that is growing to support this fetus. The placenta is a temporary structure that is manufactured within the body, and it's going to take care of everything that developing baby needs during its 9-month stay. It's going to act as the lungs, the kidney, the heart, the endocrine system, and it allows for this chemical change to happen between the mother's blood and the baby's blood, and yet not allow any blood cells to exchange. This is how a miracle happens, that a mother could have one blood type and her baby could have another blood type, and the mother's body doesn't reject the fetus as a foreign body. In fact, current science, really only since 2014, has there been a mandate in scientific research to start using female cells in every study. Before 2014, predominantly, whether it was animal or human, scientific biological studies were conducted using male cells. So since 2014, we're starting to gain much more insights about the connection between women or female cells and health and science. One of these emerging areas of study is called microchimerism. Now, some of you who are in the gaming world know as chimeras as kind of this amalgamation of two different creatures, and it's really accurate to what's now known to take place in mothers as a host body. Every single mother will have some cells of her children, whether they came to term or not, existing in her body still today. In 2021, the Smithsonian released an article called The New Science of Motherhood. And I loved this description. They said, a mother's body is like her living room. It is strewn all over with whatever the kids have cast off. Laundry, debris, homework, scattered all about. Scientists are now finding fetal cells in the deepest and most surprising places of a woman's body. These cells that were exchanged in utero now colonize a woman's lungs, her spleen, kidney, thyroid, skin, bone marrow, and brain. And often these cells stay forever. This fetal maternal microchimerism, scientists are finding that these rogue cells, even when they autopsy a woman in her old age, they will still find these cells existing long after the birthing process has happened, when her own children are 40, 50 years of age. Women carry the genes, the cells of their children with them. And so that's even why they're stumped when they find cells with Y chromosomes, the male chromosomes, in a female body. There is a cord that cannot be severed. The umbilical cord is cut within seconds of birth, but there is an invisible cord, an invisible bond that ties a mother and her child, and it endures even when the child is no longer a child. We see this kind of maternal instinct that scientists are still trying to decipher how and why it forms. They can point to hormones like oxytocin, but they know that based on how different individuals respond to their children, it's not simply a matter of one single hormone. We've all seen those YouTube videos of aggressive mothers in nature, whether it's a mother moose taking on a grizzly or a mountain lion that's swiping at terrified joggers on the alpine trails. But did you know that even the less formidable animals carry this aggressive mothering instinct? I watched one video that was done with squirrels, like cute little harmless ground squirrels, and they were playing the sound of a rattlesnake in a speaker. And the squirrels that were papa squirrels or had not had a litter of baby squirrels that year kind of were on alert, but they stayed up high in the branches, and you were just giving their alert calls to the other squirrels in the forest. But the mama squirrels who had just had a litter that season, they ran towards that speaker and they started kicking gravel at it. And so they have this documented evidence that even these little cute rodents can be ferocious and willing to take on a predator when it means harm to their young. In the UK, in Britain, cows were recently declared the most dangerous large animal in the country. They were killing more people than aggressive dogs. 74 Brits lost their lives in 15 years to a cow, most of them being mother cows who were protecting what they felt was their vulnerable calf. And so for those of you today who are wondering, can I count on God? How near is God's presence? How audacious, how protective is God's love? I think we look no further than God himself identifying as a mother. It begins in Genesis chapter 1. When we read the creation account, we find something interesting in the language as we progress through those 6 days. Throughout the first 5 days, God is speaking to the spaces that he creates. He calls to the waters and he invites them to birth out the land, to produce the land. He invites clouds to be formed in the sky. He invites the earth to sprout forth vegetation. And he calls to the heavens, let the stars be formed within you. And then, day 5, God fashions and he sees, okay, the seas have their life forms, the sky has his life forms, and he calls to the land again saying, let these creatures fill the seas, let birds reproduce and cover the earth. Verse 24, he calls to the earth and he says, earth, generate life, produce creatures. So there's this language, this command of out from these spaces should be formed, should birth all these living creatures. And it happened as God said. But verse 26, the language changes. God says, now let us conceive a new creation, humanity made in our image, fashioned according to our likeness. Here the tone shifts and Jesus, God, the triune God, the Spirit, all recognize that out of the collective us will be birthed, will form this new humanity, this new creature that's different than the birds and the fish and the animals, because it is in his likeness, bearing God's image. So God is self-described as one who would birth or create or form a new life. We see this most strongly if you read through the prophet Isaiah and his works. Isaiah often has several references in which God himself is self-describing or self-identifying as a mother. I'll read a few passages with you today. Isaiah 66, we'll begin at the end of the book, Isaiah 66:13, which says, as a mother soothes her child, so I will comfort you. Flip back a few chapters and we come to Isaiah 46, verse 3 and 4. 46, verse 3 and 4. Oops, that's 45. 46, verse 3 and 4. The Eternal One is speaking here, saying, listen, you who count yourself among Jacob's descendants, you, the remnant of Israel. This was our scripture reading today. It is you and not I who have been carried before you were born. Indeed, when you were still in the womb, I was taking care of you. And when you are old, I will still be with you, carrying you. When your limbs are tired and your eyes are weak and your hair is silvery gray, I will carry you as I always have. I will carry you and I will save you. If that doesn't sound like a mother who says their child will never be too old to be their baby, I don't know what else does. This is powerful, poetic message of how God views his children. We flip over to Isaiah 40, back a couple of chapters to Isaiah 42, verse 14, and we see that as a woman fiercely strains to give birth, God is gasping, panting, and crying out for his children. This is actually an interesting passage because the verse previous in 13, we see God in another simile. As a hero throws himself into the battle, the Eternal One will take on his enemies with passion, shouting, defeating roar, will have power over them. Verse 14, this is God speaking, and wants to counter that as a woman fiercely strains to give birth. I am fighting for you. So we have this visual of God as our warrior and God as our laboring mother in the same breath and the same movement. We go from the battlefield to the delivery room. God also is identified as the mama bear, the hovering eagle, the mother hen. And Jesus himself taps into this illustration when we read his words in either Matthew chapter 23 or Luke 13, he says, "Oh, Jerusalem." He's crying those tears of sorrow. He's experiencing the heartache only a mother experiences. How often would I have gathered you and your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings? As a pastor, I can tell you maybe it's because I'm a female pastor, but I have had more conversations with mothers than fathers who are crying and praying for the future of their children. There is something about a mother's desire to not just see her child succeed and thrive in this world, but to know that they will be with her throughout eternity, to know that their souls are saved. There is something about a mother's heartache and prayer for the salvation of her children that Jesus is tapping into in these verses. Jesus uses this maternal imagery, and some would say he also uses the maternal imagery when he speaks to Nicodemus about needing to be born again of the Spirit. We can also look to Jesus' sacrificial love on the cross, and when the soldier pierces his side, two fluids drain out, blood and water, two fluids integral to the birthing experience. And theologically, that is what the death of Jesus on the cross has done, has offered us the potential for rebirth and new life. Jesus also calls himself the source of living water, and we like to attach this imagery to the Samaritan well. But if you look at the Greek term, it's the same used for the water in a mother's womb, the living waters, the waters of life. Another metaphor that has more feminine tones is when Jesus calls himself the bread of life in John chapter 6. God might be referred to in moments like a lion, like a shepherd, like a bear. In the Psalms that we read, he is our rock and our fortress. We need to remember God also identifies as the mother in labor. It's true that God, Jesus, in human form, birthed, was male. But God, the triune God, the everlasting God, the God in whom our image we bear, whose image we bear, that God is not male or female. God is God. And our language about God, our attempt to describe God, is always going to be feeble at best. Our words are incapable of capturing God in his entirety. And when we fail to recognize the full range of descriptions, the full range of identities that God gives to himself in order to try and connect with us, in order to try and bond with us, we are missing an opportunity to grow in faith. When you are feeling distant or disconnected from God, I want you to imagine God comforting you as you've experienced or witnessed a mother comforting her crying child. This is the kind of comfort where a kiss has a magic power to make pain go away. This is the voice that you hear on the phone and suddenly the stress just melts off your shoulders. These are the glimpses of a bond that God wants to have with us. We can rejoice that these relationships, the best of these relations that we've experienced with humans on earth, are just a hint pointing us towards the grand kind of love that God desires to cultivate. If mothers and children are connected on earth at the cellular level, don't you think that's possible or true between the Creator and his creation? What if we could imagine God giving us life-sustaining nourishment in the same way that we observe and imagine and experience that happening in a parental relationship? What about the kind of trust and secrets that are sometimes exchanged between mother and child could be echoed and experienced with our Creator God? Can we imagine that God is at work in the world as a woman in labor? Can we imagine that God on a daily basis is experiencing the pains of labor, which is beautiful, miraculous, gross, heart-wrenching, all in the same moment? God's redemptive activity sometimes causes us pain. Sometimes it causes God pain too, but God is work in such a beautiful, miraculous way that is ultimately all about producing new life. Does it help us to realize that God was with us at our birth when we drew our first breath? His Spirit was there urging us into the world. Can we see that God is still doing that work for our spiritual rebirth, giving us direction, cradling us in His divine arms, encouraging and coaching us with the same intention and care and wisdom as a doula, as a midwife, as a nurse? Before anyone pulls out their phones and starts contacting the conference and saying, I think our pastor has gone off the rocker, suggesting God might be like a mother, I point you to the apostles of our church who had no issue themselves taking on this identity and recognizing how powerful it was. In the New Testament, we see both Paul and Peter calling themselves, identifying themselves as mothers of the church in their care. Galatians 4:19, we read, my little children, with whom I again suffer the pain of childbirth until I might see Christ formed in you. And Paul, seeing himself as a mother, giving spiritual birth to his converts, calling himself a tender, gentle mother, trying to nurse his children. But we were gentle with you, he says, as a nurse caring fondly for her children. With such yearning love, we chose to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but our very selves. So dear had you become to us. 1 Thessalonians 2:7-8. This is this attachment that the apostles, the spiritual leaders, are feeling for their little flock of congregants, this new collection of believers in God's way. They're identifying themselves in a mothering role because they understand that God is our Father in heaven, and God is also like the mother bear, and that His wrath is maybe not so much about being an angry God, but being a defensive God, caring about what is getting in the way between Him and His children, or them and their children. This is also a hopeful illustration for those of us who are childless or child-free, who are adoptive parents or foster parents, because Paul and Peter give us permission. They validate that the mothering experience can be tapped into, can be known, can be connected with, even if you're not a biological mother. There is that kind of audacious love, this devotion, this pouring into that you are giving up of yourself. Even if you didn't literally carry someone for 9 months in your womb, you can carry them spiritually. You can carry them with your love, with your sacrifice, with your generosity, with your grace. Isaiah 46. Listen, remnant of Israel, it is you who have been carried from before you were born. Indeed, you were still in the womb, and I was taking care of you. And when you are old, I will still be there. I will carry you as I always have. I will carry you, and I will save you. In 2018, the story of another mother captured the world, and it happened in Vancouver's backwaters. Telequa is an orca, part of Pod 15. And the world was excited because our orca population is endangered, is threatened. And so it's incredible when one is spotted to be pregnant and when a new calf is born. But sadly for Telequa, within hours of this young orca calf being born, it died. And the biologists and the scientists and the citizens of the whole Pacific Northwest were watching with sadness what would happen to this young calf. And what was expected is what typically happens is the mother tries to revive the baby, lifting it to the surface so it can breathe air, moving its body to almost try and get its heart started again. But this baby was not going to be revived. And still Telequa would not abandon this calf. For 1,000 miles and 17 days, this mother orca continued to nudge this lifeless, limp calf to the ocean surface. It inspired songs, it inspired poems, it inspired art. And when we look at that kind of a audacious, devoted love that could happen in a creature of the sea, we have to recognize that God's love is even greater than that. Ellen White says in Steps to Christ chapter 1 that through the deepest, most tender ties, our hearts can know the God who seeks to reveal themselves to us. In these moments that take our breath away of what kind of love could do this, what kind of love forgoes eating, forgoes rest, for the relentless, audacious hope that a child might be revived. How many hours and sleepless nights will a mother spend in prayer for her children? It cannot exceed the desire that God has to revive us, to revive you, to revive me, to restore us into that parent relationship with Him. Friends, today, if you have had a turbulent or traumatic relationship with your mother, hear the words of God speaking over you and blessing you, found in Isaiah 49, that even though a mother can forget her nursing child, I, Yahweh, cannot forget you. Even Telequa had to give up on her calf after 17 days. But God is not done with you yet. As long as you're still moving and breathing in this world, He is relentless and audacious in His pursuit of you, in His attempts to bond with you, to connect with you, to revive you, to experience new birth in Him. I have inscribed you on the palm of my hands, He speaks. A metaphor for the pinned hands of Jesus on the cross, from whose side sorrow and love, water and blood flow mingled down. What is your response to that kind of audacious, loving God, to the mothering God today?
Thank you for listening to OAC Vancouver's podcast. Learn more at oacvancouver.ca. If you're in Vancouver, join us for worship Saturdays at 11 a.m. at 5350 Bailey Street. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. God bless you and have a wonderful day.